Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ty, and I will be your moderator. This event, It's No Blarney, Automation Will Save You Countless Hours, is being presented by CFO Daily News and sponsored by Auditoria. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the control panel. If they're regarding the subject being presented, I'll add them to the queue for questions at the end. Now I'd like to introduce your speakers, Elaine Nowak and Nick Ezzo.
Thanks so much, Ty. Welcome, everybody. As you can tell, we are very excited about today and our theme. St. Patrick's Day is very near and dear to my heart. So, you know, if we're a little over the top, you can understand why. But top of the morning, I guess.
Top of the morning, y'all.
So I'm just going to go over real quickly the agenda for today. We're going to be talking about blockers to the standardizing processes, how to overcome those kinds of hurdles. We'll be talking a little bit about intelligent automation. You know, what is this latest tech? What are some of the buzzwords, and how can we demystify what those terms are, what actually how they can apply towards finance? Then we'll talk a little bit about outcomes that you could like to achieve, and then some practical steps. How do you just get started with finance automation and kind of realize some of the goals to help you in the office? So let's, I'm going to pass it over to you, Nick. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, what are some of the struggles that the finance teams are finding?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Great to be here, everybody, and happy St. Patty's Day. So for the third year in a row, we have run our finance state of automation in the finance back office survey. First year we did it 2 years ago, we got 200 recipients or respondents. Last year we ran it, we've got over 500 respondents, and this year we're shooting for over 1,000 respondents. And what we're really doing is we're asking finance teams to tell us what are the most manual, repetitive things, what are their friction points, what are the blockers in their day-to-day lives. And you know, no surprise, finance teams are still doing manual work. They're spending their valuable time on repetitive and clerical tasks. So 60% of people said that is the top challenge across all their functions: accounts payable, accounts receivable, FP&A, tax, treasury, you name it. It's the repetitive tasks and checking and updating data. Furthermore, in terms of hours spent following up with people, requesting documentation, and communicating with people, almost a third of people said they spend 6 to 10 hours a week, a full workday, doing that. And then 20% of people said they spend more than 10 hours a week doing that. That's 153% up from 2020. So suffice it to say, the back office, although there have been advances in automation, it's still largely manual. Elaine, what are some of these stress points that we have in the back office?
Yeah, there is a ton of stress. And, you know, you think about other areas in corporations that have a lot more technology and automation in place, and the finance back office is one of those places that does not. We see that there is a lot of manual clerical work, and it's the kind of work that's not very rewarding. You know, it's the sort of that repetitive, you do the same task over and over again, and then honestly, that can be just downright boring. And boredom leads to mistakes and errors, and that leads to poor work and decreased things like customer satisfaction. And I think that kind of work, that sort of clerical, sort of meaningless, repetitive work, it's not very rewarding. And that can also be a factor in things like increased turnover. You know, people want to do a job that's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more impactful, that has value for an organization, instead of spending a good chunk of time following up and kind of trying to get in touch with non-responsive people, or trying to get more information that's missing from some of the things you have. So there's also this lack of visibility, that you've got a lot of data that's maybe not real time, and you have to look for information. You spend so much time trying to find the status of an account or being able to make a decision or take action. You've got to do like investigative work to understand where those accounts are, what kind of documentation you have in place. So it's a lot of work that's also manual. And then there's a lack of standardizations in place, you know, the workflows, the processes. You get a lot of inefficiencies and you get redundancy. So people doing the same thing, even though they may be on 2 different teams in 2 areas, but they both do the same task. And, you know, it's not necessary. It's obviously redundant work. And then even if you do start to automate some of these workflows, and it's inevitable that you will need to automate things, you don't want to get left behind. It's going to be, the question becomes, okay, well, is it going to replace my job? Will I be out of work if I have technology in place that's going to be able to do all this kind of work? And then there's also this sort of the cyclical nature of finance it's very demanding. You have these constant deadlines. You have month close and quarter close and year-end close, and all those are deadlines that you cannot miss. And so it makes them less receptive to change because you have all of these deadlines that happen, and they're more risk averse in general. Finance people are, because they understand the numbers, they understand the risk for an organization. So big changes like automating projects seems very daunting. And then lastly, you think about compliance, you think about auditing. You want to make sure organizations are meeting their goals while they're mitigating that risk, right? And remaining within the confines, because the penalties could be financial fees and penalties that get exercised. And then there's also, I mean, there is even the possibility of facing like jail time, right? Like that is even a possibility as well. So I think all of this makes it very stressful in the back office.
And it's not just the back office folks. You know, the CFO is many times abstracted from the work that goes on in the front lines, the day-to-day. But the CFO also is at a loss or at a competitive disadvantage without that reliable visibility into the organization's cash position. And so without that reliable data and the insights, several bad outcomes can happen. The CFO or the CEO can make the wrong decision, or they can make the right decision 2 weeks too late or 2 years too late. They might miss out on opportunities for growth and investment, or missing out on expansion goals. CFO is tasked with reducing risk in the organization, and if you don't have reliable data and insights, then you may be introducing risk in your organization. And then last but not least, the experience for your customers, your vendors, your suppliers, your own internal employees can suffer from that. So let's dive into a little further into the how to overcome these hurdles. Elaine?
Yeah, so we talk about all these problems, all these challenges in the back office. So, okay, well, how do you address them? What can we do? What can be done? So I think we want to start with, how do you stay relevant, right? Organizations have to overcome these hurdles. They've got to get beyond the things that are holding their teams back. There needs to be what we want to call a shift to a modern finance operating model. So these finance back office processes, they're very transaction heavy. So if you think about the processes that need to be executed and how manual that work is, there's too much data entry, there's too much clerical type work, and it's taking up a lot of your team's time. So if you see the pyramid here, the transactional process is a big base. It's a lot of the time. And then there's a little bit time that's left for reporting and compliance, and the least amount of time for the most important work, the insights and the action that needs to be taken. So if we were to apply things like analytics and cloud computing and software that's as a service and artificial intelligence, machine learning, technology, we can then invert this pyramid. The finance back office can flip it upside down, where a lot of that transactional work can be done by automation. That's going to give you that time for reporting and compliance and the much bigger slice of that pyramid to be able to extract insights from your data, to be able to make decisions, to take action. And that's going to allow your teams to be more impactful, to really have that value add for the organization, get them into a more strategic place to be able to execute on action as well.
So let's talk about how to overcome some of those hurdles that Elaine just elucidated. So in my opinion, the first thing to do is identify what we would call low-hanging fruit, the easy wins, the quick wins, because it doesn't have to be a major undertaking. You don't have to transform the entire organization, and you don't have to do a complete finance transformation. Those are big, scary words. So why don't we start by identifying a use case? Where could automation replace redundant, repetitive tasks? What takes the most time for you and your teams? Could be reviewing all those emails that come into that shared inbox. Every company on the planet has a shared email box in finance. Sometimes it's called finance@abccorporation.com. Sometimes it's called AP or AR at abccorp.com, but everybody's got one. And it's always full of junk. And the lowest ranking person in the organization typically has the inglorious task of sifting through hundreds of email messages, trying to figure out, is this a vendor asking for an invoice? Is this a customer looking for a purchase requisition? It's a never-ending hamster wheel to go through that inbox. That could be handed over to what we call smart bots that would monitor those incoming emails and respond to those inquiries in real time, those requests for information and the updates about the status of accounts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year. So that's one low-hanging fruit point. Let's clean up that inbox and apply automation and machine learning to handle that. Another thing would be if you are if you're an AR organization, accounts receivable, or collections organization, use a bot to send out dunning and collections communications. Spending time drafting emails, identifying the overdue accounts, researching the status, all of that can be automated across your customer portfolio to handle that outreach. Lastly, you can look for processes that you do over and over again. I used to tell my team, if you're doing a task and you feel like a robot while you're doing it, pretty much a robot should be handling that. So it's the repetitive, tedious work that's perfect candidates for automation. Once you've decided you've identified those automation candidates, do a very simple automation project. Look for technology that's intuitive, easy to get up and running quickly, and then build on it from there. Move on to the next workflow, automate the next process, and continue to add that technology to relieve the stress that Elaine talked about and optimize the work that needs to get done.
So let's talk a little bit about technology, Nick. Let's get a little deeper into some of these buzzwords, things that people hear, and let's talk about how do you define them? What is it? What is some technology that's a little bit older, and then some of the newest technology that's coming out, things like intelligent automation. It sounds very fancy. Well, what does it really mean? I think I want to start by saying, if we look at Hollywood, there's a very intimidating way that technology is presented, right? If I just put this guy up on the screen, everyone's familiar with the Terminator, right? That's technology at its worst, trying to take over human lives, trying to take over the world, basically. And technology doesn't have to be that scary. It doesn't have to be the Terminator type of technology that comes into place. When we look at the evolution of technology, we see that what's happening now is incredible. We are in a time that the technology is leaping ahead of itself. It's progressing at an incredible rate. The computational power that's now available through things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, it develops exponentially, right? It is exploding. In the past, when you think about industrial growth and sort of the advances that were made, it was very much like a 45-degree angle. If you think about technology is enabling technology to even speed up that process, that's more like a hockey stick. It's going like just straight up in terms of the advances that are happening, and the advances are happening in less time, and it's just an incredible time to be around. If we look at more than a decade ago, the first grade of automation solutions appeared. It was business process management. It was this robotic process automation, and that helped to support automation needs. And that these products did really well at that time, particularly if the business processes that you were automating were well defined, if they were largely within sort of like the perimeter of an organization, so in your infrastructure, and if it was also very structured data, then they worked. But over the last 10 years, more and more applications are going into the cloud. And we're seeing that now these processes are becoming much more complex. You're touching internal users, you're touching external users. You have structured and unstructured data. You've got invoices and tax forms and purchase orders. And so these high-tech apps are now, they're more domain specific. They're more intelligent. You'll hear the word autonomous being bantered abound. It's this augmentation of human operators. The various executives or the appropriate staff now in a corporate finance function, they're really looking to execute business processes all the way through to completion and using automation to help them get there. When you compare the early tech to the latest advances and you look at things like optical character recognition, and then you compare it to things like computer vision, which Nick is going to do in just a moment, or you talk about that natural language processing and understanding, these modern techniques, they're achieving unprecedented levels of understanding for both structured data and unstructured data. When you think about NLP, the interpretation of human language, right? And machine learning that empowers self-learning, from the data, from applying that learning when humans intervene, and then learning from that human interaction and to be able to take up those tasks moving forward. They can really enhance any kind of situation with this artificial intelligence that will help supercharge the systems of record, that will execute these redundant tasks. This next wave of automation and intelligent technologies is really going to help further elevate the experience, the impact, the value of an organization, and in particular, into the finance back office. So let's just dive a little bit deeper and kind of get into a little bit more specifics around this terminology. Nick?
All right, cool. Let's talk a little bit about, so on the previous slide, Elaine had all the different technologies that are out there. We're going to drill down on each one of them kind of one by one. We've picked a few of them. So when I was starting out in the business world, there was something called OCR, or optical character recognition, very rudimentary way of taking a PDF or a JPEG, having a computer look at the characters that are on the screen, translate that into those graphical images, translate that into words and sentences. Typically, in order for that to work, it's got to be structured, everything's got to be in the right place. And those systems, for lack of a better word, were more or less dumb systems that were unable to read the graphical cues. And then they were also beset with all kinds of issues like, is that a number 5 or a letter S? Is that a lowercase l, or is it a number 1? Is it a 0 or the letter O? And OCR was not very good at that because it was looking at individual characters. Well, nowadays, that's been replaced with something called computer vision. And not to get too technical on you, but computer vision actually it's a computer algorithm that replicates how human beings see things. So rather than looking at individual characters, it looks at the information as words and sentences and context. It looks at images and videos. If you think about the things that, if you type in Google and say, show me all images of cats, how does it know what a cat is? Well, the algorithm is smart enough to figure out that it's got, whiskers and, a tail and 2 ears, and they're cuddly. So, the computer vision also then defines and collects attributes about those things. So what is this? Is it an invoice? Is it a purchase order? When something gets emailed into that shared inbox that I told you about a little while ago, is this a customer asking for a copy of proof of payment, or is this a vendor asking, when am I going to get paid? So it collects the attributes, it understands the context, it recognizes the patterns. So we've all been, the most stressful I get on the internet is when I go to a website and I'm asked, to prove that I'm a human, and I have to find all the stop signs or all the crosswalks or all the boats or all the chimneys, and I'm always feeling like I'm going to miss one. OCR does that automatically, or computer vision does that automatically. I sometimes feel like because I'm so slow at that, then the algorithm knows that I'm a human being because I'm really bad at it. But computer vision, it enables the algorithm to access all the information in the document, figure out what those are, recognize the patterns, and then also it self-trains to understand the data. With machine learning, it is exactly what it sounds like. The machine learns, and the more data you put into it, the smarter the algorithm gets. And so Elaine will walk us through how this technology applies to the finance function.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. How could OCR and computer vision, and I think you need them together to elevate the finance back office. So we understand that OCR, it helps enterprises save time and effort in scanning, right? Processing and editing documents in all sorts of forms. The information is extracted from like a printed contract, maybe it's an image that, it does it without needing to retype it. But in the finance back office, they've got a lot of these types of tasks and processes, accounts payable, accounts receivable. It's really still highly manual. And the nature of the documentation that you see, it can change from day to day. There's a lot of areas in AP and AR that require individual following up with customers or vendors, and parsing and extracting insights from unstructured documents, like invoices that might change from day to day, invoices that change from one account to another, contracts that look very different depending on who's sending them, tax forms that need to have information extracted from them. So when we look at intelligent automation and how it's evolved significantly, there is definitely a need for an inherent understanding of where data is located in a document, and an understanding of these various forms of that same data and how it might take that form across different types of documents. And that's where the computer vision brings it to the next level. Where OCR depends on a template and rules that define a document layout, computer vision takes that image, that document conversion to the next level and provides superior performance. It uses deep learning models. It accurately collects and analyzes and classifies that data. And then it uses this machine learning algorithms to detect incoming messages, that the sentiment and the intent of that message, that is definitely next level. It can understand things like finance language and bringing in the human operator when there's a need for things that computer vision and OCR can't do, like collaborating across functions, applying that judgment that's very important for the human element to be there. Computer vision really helps to simplify a lot of the paper-driven processes that happen across the enterprise, including things that Nick referred to, inbox inquiries or vendor onboarding, invoice processing, tax form data refresh, things like that that can be done. So let's talk now, Nick, can you take us more into like the natural language processing and the natural language understanding?
Sounds great. So natural language processing used to be called speech recognition. And by the way, it's been around for more than 50 years. If you've ever called your bank, your airline, call centers, for a long time, that was the only type of speech recognition that was out there. And mainly people would just say operator, agent, representative. But we've come a long way since then. Why is that? Well, for a couple of reasons. One is that, everybody has in their pocket a device like this, or at home, you may have a home assistant like a Google or Alexa. And because of that, it has allowed this technology to actually hear things and understand context. More than 10 years ago, the TV show Jeopardy! Jeopardy champion Ken Jennings was famously defeated by IBM's Watson. And although IBM may have overhyped the use of AI and Watson, what they really figured out after that was that AI and natural language processing is really good at understanding a question and providing the best possible answer. So what is NLP? It's really the automatic manipulation of speech and text by software. In our world, in the finance back office, we don't speak to the machine, but the machine can read and understand the language in an email. If somebody says, give me a copy of the PO, give me a copy of the invoice, the machine understands that and can then take action to do that. We use algorithms to take the human-produced text inputs from an email or a PDF or some other note within the ERP or software, accounting software, and produce natural outputs. And then lastly, natural language processing understands the sentiment and the intent. Is somebody angry? Are they happy? Are they giving you a compliment? Are they upset? And what do they want? And so really, this is the first step in how do we fulfill those needs. We fulfill those needs by first understanding what the person is asking for. So Elaine, how do we apply NLP and NLU in the back office?
Yeah, so I think having this kind of natural language processing software, and it uses the semantic libraries you talked about, it allows non-technical finance business users to leverage AI and things like smart bots that can perform a range of tasks and communicate to internal and external stakeholders using natural language, understanding finance terms. These intelligent bots will translate requests into actionable sequence processes that they execute on behalf of the business user. So these capabilities, they're built on top of cloud-native workflow engines, and that helps them to seamlessly scale across hundreds of thousands of nodes that are capable of executing various tasks concurrently in the back office. And that's where the processing power of things like technology solutions really gives you the advantage. It's this contextual understanding and responses related to finance. It's the ability to take that finance-related intent detection and help to make decisions. And I think also you referred to this, Nick, it's this ability to say, okay, an email's come in and this person's angry or frustrated, and now I'm going to elevate this email to the attention of a human operator who can come in and address this on a more personal relationship-based approach. And so that's where the NLP, the AI technology, the contextual understanding really helps to organizations to be able to take out some of this sort of the redundant work, the tedious work for things like inbox inquiries and so on. So now I think what I'd like to get into a little bit more, Nick, is let's talk about if you do put automation in place and when you do employ some of this technology like NLP and computer vision and get machine learning and artificial intelligence automation in place, what's it going to do for you in the back office? How is it going to help the benefits and elevate your team? So I think if we talk about automation, we put it in place, that's really going to make you smarter. It's going to make you faster. It's going to help you to make more precise decisions. It allows you to get real transparency in place. And what does that mean? That means better visibility into your AP and AR activities. And that's across your customer and your vendor portfolio. So it's on both the order to cash side and on the procure to pay side. It's going to help you to have faster dispute resolution, and that's going to lead to better customer satisfaction. You're also going to have greater access to your data, and that's going to allow you better insights. And that also is going to give you the ability to understand your cash position better and helps lead to increased cash performance. You're going to see efficiencies that are going to be put in place. With greater efficiency, when you have things that are automated, now your team can be at that value added part more quickly. The documentation, the backup information, the research that has to get done can now be done by automation and technology. And that's going to give your teams back time to be able to do those higher level business functions. You're going to be able to scale without adding headcount. You can get more done with less team members because automation can take care of a lot of those kind of repetitive tasks. And that's going to help organizations to grow without busting their budgets. And, you know, Nick, you and I talked a little bit about this too. This ability to be able to scale and add, you know, you've got thousands of transactions. And we know right now there is a lot of the Great Resignation that's been happening, and there's a lot of competition out there for additional resources. And it's really, people are leaving their jobs in record numbers. And so how do you make the positions that they're working in more impactful, more meaningful, so they don't want to do that type of tedious work? That's where you put automation in place to take care of that, like a junior accountant that's doing all of that clerical administrative work that no one really wants to do. They want to do that more interesting sort of strategic type work. And I think lastly, then you put automation in place. Automation is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It doesn't get sick. It's always there doing that work. And that's going to help you have more standardized processes. It's going to help you have that greater accuracy. It's going to give your teams the ability to gain greater insight with a single source of truth. It's going to reduce things like mistakes and errors and the redundancy in the work that's getting done by your teams. And that ultimately is going to help your team build greater trust in understanding the data that you have and allows your teams to really perform at their peak. Nick, thoughts on?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what you said about the Great Resignation, by the way, because you and I talk to CFOs and controllers every day. And one of the things that we've heard over and over and over again is that people have left their roles in record numbers, in droves, and to try to replace those people is very difficult, particularly when folks are coming out of college and they don't want to do the work that their parents did. They don't want to do data entry. They don't want to make sure that column A matches column B. And they certainly don't want to call people on the phone and ask them for money. So it's like, it's the world of finance and accounting for people just coming into the profession today is very different than it was 30 years ago. It's very different than it was 10 years ago, as you pointed out in one of your earlier slides. So what are some of these benefits? Technology for technology's sake does nothing. So it has to have a benefit to the organization and to the people who work in that organization. So if I'm the CFO, having that increased visibility into my end-to-end processes and controls actually gives me a lot more control. And as the CFO, I would care very much about what's happening from the money coming in, the money going out, the reporting, the compliance, everything that happens every step of the way. So, technology does give you that lens, that microscope that you can look at and peer into the data, find out what's happening. Along with that, you get those real-time insights into areas of risk or weakness. So if you think about the things that keep CFOs and controllers up every night staring at the ceiling, are the bad guys going to get into my systems? Is there a material error in my financial data that's going to cost me my job or potentially some, to cause our share price to tumble on Wall Street? But having that real-time insight into those areas of risk de-risks the situation, obviously, for the CFO, controller, and everybody else in the finance department. We get to use technology to identify data outliers and anomalies. Are there things that are happening? Fraud is a real thing. I don't need to tell people on this call. It happens every day. Every single person on this webcast, I can guarantee you, can tell me stories about anomalies and outliers that were material. And if they hadn't gotten caught, that would be a big deal. Reporting. I refer to the hamster wheel, and Elaine talked about the repetitive nature of finance and accounting. You've got the month-end close, you've got the quarterly close, you've got year-end close, you've got reporting, you've got taxes that need to be filed, tax forms that need to be issued to employees and contractors. how do we make those things happen much faster? How do we reduce the friction? How do we get rid of all those mundane processes? Technology. Professional experience, optimal professional experiences for finance teams. Again, if I'm a person coming out of accounting school right now, I'm not going to sit there and write in a little ledger. I'm not wearing the green eye shade. I want technology. I want dashboards and reports and graphs and trending. That experience allows me as a finance professional to deliver benefits and value to my organization. I don't want to be a data entry clerk. I want to be the person that says, hey, I've noticed that we could probably move some things around and actually reinvest something over here, and I can provide insights and recommendations to my organization. I could perform advanced analytics, things like maybe our days sales outstanding is looking pretty good, but maybe our customers are starting to slip a little bit, or there's a segment of customers in a market that are starting to pay late, or that could potentially benefit from an upsell opportunity. If you don't have time to spend, if you're spending all your time on data entry, you're not spending your time on data analytics. And then lastly, customer satisfaction. We've said it before, it's important. It's not just customer satisfaction, it's vendor and employee satisfaction as well. So if you can give somebody the answer that they're looking for in real time, any time of the day or night, using an automated bot through email or some other method, it's going to be a better experience for your customers, your vendors, and your employees. So now why don't we kind of wrap it up, Elaine, and then we'll move into some Q&A.
Yeah, but I'd say they don't want to wear the green shade unless it's St. Patrick's Day. Then they might want to wear the green shade. So
Good points. Good point.
So yeah, so let's talk about some practical steps. You hear these buzzwords. Sometimes they can be intimidating, and you say, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to get started. Like, what can I do? So let's have you, we can go over some of these practical steps. I'll go over the first one, Nick, and then maybe we can take turns. But I think you want to consider to cloud or not to cloud. And what we would say, if you have on-premise systems today, you really need to get with the game, and you've got to move to the cloud. That's your first step. So it's no longer a consideration of if, but when. You really need to be in the cloud, and that's going to be that will allow you to take advantage of some of this SaaS-based solution as a service kind of technology that's out there. So I'd like to say be sassy, sassy as in software as a service. Okay, yeah, great. Okay, Nick.
Be sassy, be sassy. And well, you and I met some people this week that were talking about how their accounting system is still running on AS400 computers that are on premise. So it's like, or a PeopleSoft implementation from 2005 is here, like 17 years later, it's still humming along. And although that might not seem like it's a big deal, it does introduce risk by keeping that stuff on premise. The cloud used to be a scary place. Now actually the cloud is a safe bet, because if I'm a CFO, I'm not an IT guy. I don't want to think about how to keep the bad guys out of my system. I would rather pay a SaaS provider, a cloud provider, to take care of that stuff for me. So that's one less thing for me to worry about when I'm laying in bed at night staring at the ceiling. Along with that, embracing SaaS and being sassy is having an innovative architecture along with cloud-based accounting systems. What you get is the ability to operate on your data anytime, any place. A good friend of mine, he does triathlons. He's a finance guy. Every Friday, he's at the pool swimming laps, and his team, they don't know that he's at the pool swimming laps, but he gets out, he does his work, he goes back in the pool. So it allows him to do his job from anywhere. Today's innovative architecture also applies something called APIs, application programming interfaces. It allows third-party developers to write programs, applications that will then connect to your ERP system or your accounting system to do something. There are a whole category of companies that do close management. There are whole categories of companies that do collections automation, whole categories that do financial planning and analysis. How is this all possible? Because they can operate on the data within the accounting system through APIs. And that's what we mean. It's along with SaaS and with the cloud, you get this innovative architecture that opens up a whole category of things that you can do. Elaine?
I think also to that point, Nick, I mean, when you think about software that's delivered as a service in the cloud, then you're going to constantly get updates. You're going to get the latest tech. You're going to get new releases, and you get, patches and fixes and bugs, and all that stuff will happen seamlessly because it's in the cloud. And so that's really where organizations can then take advantage of new features, new capabilities, and all of this super awesome advanced tech that just keeps coming out with something new. And you can stay up to date with that stuff much more quickly if you have that innovative architecture, if you're operating out of the cloud. Now, along the same lines, we talk about lift and shift versus transformation. Transformation seems like a big, scary word, but I think it's super important to understand that when you look at the day-to-day activities that are happening in the back office, you have to think about, where do I want to start? What can and should be transformed? And you have to consider the processes that you're doing, the way you're doing your process may not be the best way to do it. So you don't want to just automate your current process. You want to look at your outcomes and understand, what do you want to achieve? And maybe I can get there by doing things a little differently, employing software, getting a plan together and executing the automation around that plan. Look to your outcomes, figure out where you want to be, and let technology get you there. Don't just automate the process the way it is. You could probably do better with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then as you reevaluate what those processes should be, the optimal process, and then you apply automation and technology to streamline those processes, automate what can be automated, then you have to figure out, how do we plug our team into that, right? We're not using technology to get rid of human beings. Rather, we're using technology to elevate the work that those human beings are doing. Nobody ever went to school to be a collections agent. No kid growing up says, when I grow up, I want to call people on the phone and ask them for money. No one. But those people end up doing those jobs because their employer hasn't applied a technology solution to solve that. But if you allow automation and bots to handle a lot of that routine, mundane work of communicating with customers, reminding them for payments, using email to collect payments, allowing them to use portals and things like that. Now you've got, instead of people on the phone making calls asking for money, now you have those people who are now in charge of the bots. They can do the reporting. They can come up with other alternative strategies for deploying the technology. So it's very important that as you think about your processes, you think about how you want people to plug in. What are some of the things that human beings are good at that machines are not good at? One of them is customer service. A bot will never be able to be empathetic. Bots don't have empathy. Human beings do, most of us. And so if a customer is upset or angry or needs some complicated problem solving, give that to a human being. Things that are routine, mundane, transactional, give that to a bot. Your team will be happier and your company will be more effective. What about capitalizing on the opportunity, Elaine?
Yeah, I think this one just kind of ties it all up in a little bit of a bow, right? Because when you automate in the back office, that translates to dollar figures. And who doesn't love dollar figures more than finance teams, right? You could look at things like reduce your DSO. If you could just reduce your DSO by a day, that translates into additional cash flow for your organization. That translates into opportunity. That translates into expansion or growth or reinvestment or development. I mean, that money is going to be translated to business opportunities. So you want to capitalize on the opportunity that something like automation will deliver for your finance teams, that if you free up time, you get better cash flow position understanding, you get data and insights and reporting that's going to help you just to optimize your organization. Why wouldn't you want to take advantage of that? I think it would be a super important point to kind of drive home. And then I do want to talk about one other big thing that happens a lot. And I think you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Nick, when you were talking about it. It's this idea of the change management, because you have to assess where you are and you have to assess where you need to be. So going back to where I talked about, what are the outcomes you want to achieve? That's beginning with the end in mind. It's a crucial aspect. And if you want to have a successful automation project, you need to start with the end in mind. So where do you want to be? And then you can figure out, how does automation get you there? And then you have to have a change management plan ready, okay? You have to have crisp communication. You have to have training plans in place. You want to ensure the success of your new system and a smooth transition from your legacy operations to your systems. Get your teams involved. Make sure that they're part of the process of the implementation. If they're the ones who are going to be using the software, make them a part of the implementation and the deployment so that they are able to be part of the success of those processes being put in place. You want to spend the time to identify your stakeholders. You need to understand who's going to be involved, from the executive level all the way down to your users, from the top to the bottom. You want to do initial evaluation. You want to do a blueprinting You want to identify who needs to be involved at all these phases of your implementation, who in the IT, who on your business side that's going to be involved before, during, and after your post go live. I also think that you cannot emphasize enough that before you roll out a new system, you really want to do exhaustive testing. You do not want to roll out a system and then all of a sudden you as a finance person can't do your close because you've got bugs that have to be fixes. You've got gaps roadblocks that came up that you did not understand. A lot of implementations can be done in a parallel way. While you're still continuing to do the finance operations, then you're testing the new systems to make sure, maybe even running those processes in parallel to do a comparative. How is your team executing and doing the work? How is the automation executing and doing the work? And who's achieving the better outcomes? You better hope it's that automation that you're investing in and the dollars that you're doing. So that's how you can sort of then switch it on once you know that you've worked through the bugs, worked through so that your go lives are smooth. And then I think you can't underscore the power of a subject matter expert. You need someone who understands the finance processes to be able to put automation in place. You don't want to just put automation in place that is a one-stop shop for everybody, that is sort of an exhaustive, it's got to be the technology that understands how the finance back office works and understands those processes so that those professionals can come in and say, this is how it needs to get done. They have to understand what it takes in the finance back office to be successful. And that's going to really help you get through that process. So I think it's time to kind of bring it home, Nick. Let's talk about, we hit on a lot of topics today. We talked about the challenges, the repetitive work, manual tasks, right? The hurdles that have to be, kind of leapt over in order to get to the success, right? So the clerical administrative work, that can be automated, that will help drive standardization. It's going to help increase your accuracy across your finance functions. That's really going to allow for dynamic data aggregation, extraction, and transformation. Again, that big word. That's going to just give you a much better, more enriched environment for your finance teams, greater visibility, and just it's going to help increase the collaboration among your teams and across departments.
Yeah, and the key benefits of, like, as you mentioned, Elaine, transparency, efficiency, and accuracy using automation is going to recover thousands of hours annually, making companies stronger and more competitive.
Yeah, and I think we need to also score this idea of like SaaS, okay, and this idea of using cloud data operations, using things like machine learning. Don't be intimidated by technology because it has fancy acronyms or big words. All of this technology, all of this automation is really going to help you improve cash performance. It's going to drive greater margins for your organization. It's going to help you achieve the greater impact and do it more quickly and get that return on your investment. It'll help you mitigate fraud and risk and accelerate things like decision making. So now you're going to be smarter. You're going to be more precise by the way that you're going to execute on operations and just really make your teams more nimble and strategically focused.
Well, and lastly, get started with practical next steps, a good vendor evaluation, thorough change management plan, and as Elaine mentioned, preparation is definitely the key to success. So the pace of business really demands faster and shorter cycle times. It also requires finance to operate with greater agility. So because of this pace, data and processes have to be standardized, simplified, and you can spend more time focusing on your analysis and your strategy. Underpinning all of this requires the workforce shift and embracing new ways of working to bring greater efficiency. If the last 2 years have shown us anything, it is that those companies that adapt survive, those who do not, do not. So I'll hand it back over to Ty at this point so we can open the floor for any questions. Ty, are you back on the line with us?
I am here. Yes, sir. And I don't see any questions at the moment, but folks, if you have questions, please submit them into the chat box now.
Well, I can ask a question. I can think of a question to ask Elaine.
Okay.
So, Elaine, what are the things that are holding back companies from implementing this type of technology? Why would, you made a very compelling case here through this webinar. It seems very obvious that technology is there, it's arrived. Why do companies still sit on the sidelines and don't jump into technology implementation that will help them and their company.
Yeah, I think sometimes organizations will take on something that's just too huge of a project. And then I think the other piece of that is, if you have technology that needs to be customized in order for it to work with your business, with your systems of record, with your ERP systems, that's going to lead to longer implementation times. It's going to lead to more people being involved. It's going to lead to complexities that make it more difficult to put automation in place. You want to look for kind of software that is configurable versus customized in order for it to work and function with your organization. I talked about change management, right? Identifying key stakeholders. I think within that, you need to find your champion. Who is that one person in your organization that's going to lead this project and take accountability for the project? You have to find that champion. That's super important. And, I think people have heard this phrase, you need to inject predictability into the process, right? So you have to understand and know what are the expectations, what is going to happen, and you need to articulate that very clearly and concisely to you and your teams and your stakeholders, to the executive level, all the way down to your users. And I think I hit on this a little earlier, but you can't emphasize enough training and testing. That's hugely important if you want to get adoption and get your team members to actually use the software that you put in place. It's hugely important. Training, testing, super important.
Yeah, I think finance people, similar to IT people, they tend to solve problems by just throwing more bodies at the problem. I'm going to work longer, more nights and weekends and holidays away from my family, and sometimes technology is not the first lever that they go to because maybe they're not familiar with it, maybe they're afraid of it, maybe they've been burned by it in the past, and so I think there's a little bit of that too. Elaine, you and I were at a conference this week and we spoke to a few hundred finance professionals. One of the topics that came up was the Great Resignation and how companies are struggling to keep their workforce happy, keep them productive, stop them from walking out the door. And then if they do walk out the door, people are having a really hard time replacing them. So what are your thoughts about how technology can help mitigate some of the effects of the Great Resignation that we've seen?
Well, if you sort of take away that kind of, like I would say, for lack of a better word, crappy kind of work that people don't want to do, that's going to be huge impact, right? If you can automate things like who wants to go through how many people, if I said raise their hands, how many people spend a good portion of their day going through their email box? Well, there's no reason to go through email after email. There are technologies available that will go through your email box, catalog all those emails, and that helps you replace, like if you're not replacing that person, you're taking away that kind of clerical administrative work and allowing technology to make the kind of work that your teams do that much more interesting, that's much more elevated. It's more attractive then to be able to get those resources that say, okay, we've got this automation in place, so you don't have to do that. Now you can do more analysis. Now it can be more strategic. Now we can identify places for additional improvement and then continuously make our teams more productive, efficient, and technology can help you do that and really expand and grow in a way that you couldn't do it without technology.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Let's check in with Ty. Ty, any questions from the floor? Any questions that you might have?
Yes, thank you. A few questions have come in, and our first question reads, what are some of the requirements when evaluating an automation solution?
Elaine, you want to take that one, or should I take a swing at it?
Yeah, I think we could both kind of hit on this one. I think we touched on a few of these, but I think we can sort of maybe put a finer point on it. One of the things you definitely have to do is ease of integration. How quickly can you have it? And I think you mentioned APIs earlier, why that's important, SaaS and cloud technology, why that's important. But all of that ties back to, can it integrate with the current systems you have? And people, organizations, they might grow organically, they might grow by acquisition, they might grow by merger, right? So a lot of finance people we talk to might have more than one ERP system. They might have more than one system of record. They might have transportation systems, contract systems, all sorts of different systems. Well, how easily does your software integrate with all these systems? I think that's a super important piece to take into account when looking at different types of technology.
Yeah, I think another way to look at it too would be to take a look at what companies are good at. What is their sweet spot? Unfortunately, many times a company will have success in one area and they'll start to branch out into other areas where they may not have established features and product. I worked for an ERP company for many years, great company, and they had been around for 20 years, and because they had 20 years of legacy code in their application, it was very difficult for them to introduce new features like AI and machine learning.
Mhm.
If you look at companies that have open, and by the way, that company had a very open API, so although it was hard for them to implement technology into their legacy code, they had a whole partner ecosystem that was around them. So if you wanted a billing application, if you wanted a payment application, if you needed a reporting application, all this stuff plugged in to the APIs of these systems. So it's also very important to figure out what does the partner ecosystem look like and which companies play together well. One of the things I think that we at Auditoria do exceedingly well is that we turn down business for things that we are not good at. And we
Mhm.
will push things to our partners that they can do, and we'll work with them to do the things that we can do best. So that's kind of how I think about technology.
Yeah, and I think another point to make too is your implementation timeline. You hear about people that are upgrading to, let's say, the next release of a big software, right? And they're talking it's going to take a year, 2 years. I mean, that's a long time. And by the time you get that technology in place, who's to say there's not technology that replaces that technology? And so you're always playing that kind of catch up. So look at things like implementation timeline. How quickly can you get a solution up and running and working for your teams? And I think there's also, even if you're doing a big upgrade, people say, I can't do anything until I get this upgrade in place. And I think that is one of the biggest falsehoods that people will operate under. It's during that transition time when you're upgrading to a new ERP that you really can take advantage of small, nimble point solutions that can help your teams in the immediacy, that can really make a difference while you're undergoing this big transformation. And then don't be afraid of saying, okay, I could allocate some time, effort, and work for my team. They got a full-time job doing finance things. They don't have all this time to be able to be like, okay, now I've got to do this, test the system. So make sure you have, to your point, good partner in your software vendor and the ability to say, okay, we're going to take this one piece, like you talked about that low-hanging fruit, and implement that and automate that piece. And then once that gets automated, now I'm freeing up time. Now all of a sudden I've got more time to be able to look at this big project or work on these finance analysis, strategy, reporting, and that kind of thing. So I think that's also very important to say, hey, it doesn't have to be a big thing. You can do little pieces and still find success and continuously get better.
Yep, great answer. Ty, any other questions from the floor?
Yes, thank you. Our next question, related to the one above, was what are some of the qualities to look for in evaluating a technology vendor?
Some of the qualities to look for. Well, I would say innovation and a track record of innovation, because that is important. I would say that, and this is not a commercial for my company, but we've only been around for, let's say, a little less than 3 years. Why is that? The technology that we have in our system didn't exist 5 years ago. So
Right.
things are moving at a rapid clip. And so, there are companies that have been around for 50, 60 years that are still, out there. And, I don't know if I would go to them as my first go-to to implement technology. So I want a company that's fast, that's nimble, that's quickly innovative, but it's also backed by really strong partners and potentially really strong investors. We at Auditoria, we partner with Workday, we partner with Sage Intacct, we partner with Oracle NetSuite. We've got strong relationships among all of those companies. And so, because we know we can't do it on our own. So again, back to that partnering strategy, we tend to take a team approach as we go to market. And I think that's important to help finance people feel more comfortable and to minimize the risk in any given implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great points, Nick. And I think another thing you should really kind of look at when you evaluate a technical vendor is, do they have expertise and knowledge for my functional area? And so are they specifically, for example, do they have a specific understanding of the finance back office? There's organizations that have solutions that are across so many different areas. And I think you know, you hear that the expression, the jack of all trades, expert at none. And then what was the rebuttal to that one, Nick, right? But then you could be a little good at a little bit of everything. No, I think you need to have that sort of expert knowledge and understanding of certain functional areas, because that depth of understanding will help to make the implementation of that software that much more seamless, because the people, they get what it is you do and how you do your job. And I think that's an important thing, that expert knowledge, that industry specific functional knowledge is hugely important when looking at vendors as well.
Built for finance is the way I talk about it. Built by finance for finance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I think we have time for maybe one more question if there's one out there.
Yeah, and I did want to mention, so the rebuttal was, but oftentimes it's better than a master of one.
Yes, thank you, Ty. I knew there was a rebuttal for that one.
So let me see. There was. I don't see any more questions, but somebody did just mention that automation has helped curb the Great Resignation for mobile remote work, like the hybrid work. Because Nick, you had mentioned it cuts out the mundane stuff. So somebody had mentioned that.
Yeah,
Nice.
they did the poll when we were at this conference earlier this week, Elaine and I, and they show of hands in the ballroom, like how many people are back in the office full time, how many people are hybrid, how many people are fully remote still. And it was a little bit of a mixed bag. Some people were fully back in the office, some people were hybrid, and some people were remote. But the common theme we heard across all of them is that employees want the flexibility, and employees are demanding from their employers the flexibility to have at least some remote component if they need to pick up their kids, if they need to work from, on vacation or whatever from some other place. And technology, whether it's remote conferencing, collaboration tools, messaging tools, or using bots, all of those things help facilitate the remote work that people have gotten used to over the last 2 years. Elaine, I'll give you the last word on that one.
No, I think 100%. I think that automation has helped. If you had an on-premise solution, okay, then you were probably scrambling to try to figure out how am I going to get my teams to operate remotely when they have to be scanning checks at the office. Technology can help step in and make that a much more a much simpler process for your organizations, and then being able to have your laptop at home, take that laptop into work. There's a seamlessness with way you can transition between those two if you are in a hybrid environment, right? That it's the ability to go back and forth and not lose time or effort or logging in or information is critically important for teams to be able to be productive in a hybrid, remote, and in-person environment. So there you go. So to tie it all back to St. Patrick's Day, don't leave it to luck. You've got to really bet on that pot of gold, find your rainbow, and we will tell you that pot of gold, if you were to look at all those coins, it's automation to help you.
Yeah, on behalf of
No
Elaine
Blarney.
at Auditoria,
No
I want
Blarney.
to thank everybody. Yes, this has been a lot of fun. I'm going to go out and find that pot of gold at the end of my rainbow. And I think at this point, I'll cede the rest of our time back to our moderator, Ty.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nick and Elena. Always great. A lot of good guidance and info there. And on behalf of CFO Daily News, I would also like to thank everyone for attending. This concludes our program.
Thanks.